Hello and welcome. A rapidly rising number of gruesome killings is characterizing Mexico's war against the drug trade, and it's spilling over the US border. The relationship between America and its neighbor has become visibly strained as both sides point the finger of blame, giving the drug barons a window of opportunity to expand their operations. By some estimates, the Mexican drug cartels, who are fighting each other and the government at the same time, have 100,000 foot soldiers, virtually half of the Mexican army's force of 230,000. Officials in Washington say the crisis has become a full-blown national security concern for the United States, which for decades could count on quiet borders. The US has stepped up its military assistance, but experts say force is not the solution as long as the demand for drugs in America grows. Today we ask, is Mexico spiraling out of control? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com and to /AJE and enter the chat room and then take part. And we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, I'm joined today by the former director of the US Drug Enforcement Administration, Asa Hutchinson. Secretary Hutchinson was also the first Undersecretary of Homeland Security when that agency was created in the aftermath of 9/11. And he's a former congressman from Arkansas, from where he joins us. And with me in the studio is Jesus Esquivel, the Washington correspondent for the Mexican weekly magazine, Proceso. Thank you both for joining us. Secretary Hutchinson, if I could start with you and ask if, based on your experience, the Mexican drug trade has become a real threat to national security in the U.S.
Indeed it has. It has always been a problem both to the government of Mexico, to the stability of its institutions, but now some of the violence has spilled over into U.S. cities in far-flung places far from the border. It is a national security concern. Mexico has been a great ally and friend of the United States, and we want that to continue, obviously, but we do want to work together to make sure the violence does decrease and that the government of Mexico can be more successful against the narco traffickers. They actually are in some jeopardy if President Calderon does not succeed in becoming a narco state. So we're very supportive and want him to succeed.
In reality then, sir, whose war is this, America's or Mexico's?
Well, it's, I think it's both of ours. Obviously, as Mexico rightfully points out, much of the demand comes from the United States side. So we want to make sure that we reduce the demand for illegal drugs in our country. At the same time, we have to be able to have success of the Mexican government institutions to go after the narco traffickers. And so I don't think this is a finger-pointing game. It is a matter of great concern between two friendly nations and who have a very long common border.
Okay, well, Jesus Esquivel, one of the problems is that fingers are being pointed, isn't it? That,
yes.
The blame is being...
Especially on Capitol Hill.
Okay, so in reality, where do you see the problem lies?
Well, I think the problem is that the Mexican government hasn't been so far effective to control the narco traffickers in the Mexican northern border. And the other factor is that the U.S. is not doing enough so far. We have to take note that Obama administration is very new. And in the last 8 years during the Bush administration, probably Mr. Hutchinson will know very well, even DEA agents were complaining that the U.S. government completely forgot the war on drugs because they were so concentrated on fighting terrorism. And the Mexican drug cartels start, pouring to the south border of the United States. Now they are operating in the U.S. like in Mexico.
What has driven the violence to such a gruesome level? The stories in the media are really quite horrific.
Well, there are two factors. First, the drug cartels are fighting each other to control the roads for to put the drugs on the way to the U.S. Like Ciudad Juarez, for example, is the grand prize for all the Mexican drug cartels. And the second is they are trying to intimidate the Mexican government. Felipe Calderon is using the military personnel to combat drug traffickers, and they don't want to be intimidated by the Mexican government. They want to, give the bravo men fighting the Mexican government. I think those are the two factors, and very easily to find out. If it wasn't for the demand of drugs in the U.S., no war between the drug cartels.
We're going to try and get an update from Juarez in just a moment from our correspondent there. We'll get to that in just a sec. But let me bring a couple of emails in. Perhaps Secretary Hutchinson, I can put these to you, sir. The first one, actually two on a similar subject, on the subject of demand for drugs in the US. First email from Canada. Gil Hughes in Vancouver Island says, Hard drugs are in huge demand in the US, and that says something about the country. There are billions spent on enforcement and incarceration to no avail. The problem is the users who create the demand. The second one from Australia says, and it's from Esanoma, a regular viewer in Sydney, says, the only way out is to have programs for users and education for young children on drugs, hence cutting down on the demand for drugs. Why has the demand become so high in the US, sir?
Well, it's very important to put this in historical perspective that in the height of the drug usage in our country in the late 70s and early 80s, and then the initiation of the federal effort to fight illegal drugs, overall drug use has declined 50% in this country. Even in the last 10 years, it's declined among teenagers. And so we have seen demand for drugs historically reduced. The problem is it is still too high. There's still the demand. We got to concentrate and work on it. As one of the callers mentioned, you certainly have to work on drug education. I was on the enforcement side, but it takes both the enforcement side, reducing the flow coming through the border, punishing those that violate the law, particularly that distribute the drugs, but you've got to engage in education efforts. And the education efforts do pay off in the United States. So I do not accept the proposition, though, that the demand is increasing. In fact, we're, if anything, decreasing that, and I hope the Obama administration will continue that path.
Sus, could we compare the Merida initiative that's been put forward by the U.S. For Mexico to combat the drug trade with that of Colombia, Plan Colombia, that the U.S. put in there? Some say it's the impact of Plan Colombia is what has pushed the drug trade in Mexico so high because the border is switched.
Well, Plan Colombia was very effective at the beginning of the Clinton administration, but later on we see that the drug traffickers move from country to country. Now they are having more drugs in Central America that are going to Mexico very easily. I don't believe it's fair to compare the Merida initiative to Plan Colombia, because in Merida initiative, the U.S. government is giving military equipment, intelligence equipment, and training to the Mexican authorities. And that's when you find that the U.S. has two phases. President Bush requests to Congress $1.4 billion for the Merida initiative in a 3-year period. We just saw this week that the House of Representatives approved less money for the Merida initiative, $300 million. So the question in Mexico is, why? If they want to fight the drugs and help us, why are they reducing the money for the Merida initiative?
Well, listen to what I had a chat with the Colombian President Alvaro Uribe in January early this year. Let's listen to what he had to say on this topic of the drug trade.
There is one topic. The name is co-responsibility. Therefore, every industrialized country with high rate of illicit drug consumption is co-responsible to fight with us, to side with us in the battle against illicit drugs. We have assumed our responsibility to overcome this problem in Colombia. The industrialized countries with high rates of consumption, they have to assume their own responsibilities. And it is very important to highlight that, for instance, while the people in the United States consume illicit drugs, narco-traffickers are killing people in Colombia.
Secretary Hutchinson, listening there to Alvaro Uribe, the Colombian president, talking about the need for more responsibility for the industrialized countries. What's your response, and what could be a starting point to try to improve the situation to be more effective against the narco-traffickers?
Well, in terms of President Uribe, I think he's done a very effective job in teaching responsibility there in Colombia. His government has taken a very strong stand against the FARC, the narco-traffickers, the terrorist drug-funded organizations, and it's had success. And that's what we have to remember, that when you stand up, you're strong, you commit resources, you work in partnership, then you can have success. I think in Mexico, and it has shifted much over to the Mexico corridor, we need to work in partnership together. That's the most important thing to win this battle. Secondly, I think we've got to reduce demand and focus on that. Educate young people, and do not give in to those people that say, well, the easy answer is to legalize or decriminalize drugs. That's not the solution. There's too many drugs out there. There's too many illegal products, too much contraband. The cartels will still be engaged in illegal activity regardless. We need to make sure we do what's right for our country and educate our young people to say no to drugs. But then in working in cooperation, the government of Mexico has got to maintain a long-term commitment to win this battle against the narco traffickers in Mexico. It's going to be violent. Right. There's a potential of it getting worse. And we've got to work together.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to just pause here as we take a short break. More of our discussion in a moment. Now, as we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments. Just log on to livestation.com and enter the chat room there. The debate's taking place. We'll be right back.